Video in it.
Hello, my name's Alec. I work for BC Merchants. We're an Illinois-only distributor.
Come on in.
Come on.
We're just starting, so we didn't miss anything.
Nope.
Except for this is Alec.
I'm Alec.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. But we're an Illinois-only distributor that only deals with family-owned distilleries.
Cool.
So anything in our portfolio is centrally owned by one family or one small group, maybe, but that doesn't mean that the out-of-country stuff doesn't have importers that bring them in, like Package or some of those others. But we're small, we only deal with quality control, good stuff. So what that translates to is I don't have to sell crap. So probably our showpiece of our bourbon or whiskey portfolio that isn't Scotch would be the Willet family estate stuff. Willet's been around since 1936. They barreled their first barrel, I think 1937, and that would have been Old Bardstown. So this was their first release in 1940. It would have been 4 years old, or 1941. But through the years, they've come out with all of these other lineups. They all have fun. They all have different mash bills, first of all. There's 6 different mash bills from Willet. 4 of those are bourbon, 2 of those are rye. I may need to seek a little help on a few of them, but the base of, so their core lineup, we'll take these out. Their core lineup, meaning they're everyday available for the most part and easily accessible whiskeys, are these guys. And there's one more missing called Pure Kentucky. Now, they are a small distillery, so there's been years where every one of these is allocated all year long. And we get 25 bottles of Johnny Drum to give out. Those times have changed a little bit, and these are all fairly regularly available. The most allocated being the pot still and the rye, because those are their smallest productions. There are also their only 2 that don't have the base of their first mash bill, which is 72% corn, 13% rye, and 15% malted barley. That's their OG Thompson Willet mash bill. So that's their original mash bill. That is the base of every one of these. However, they're blending other mash bills into some of them. So, yes.
Sorry, so are those considered bourbons?
These would all be considered bourbons, but except for this one. This is a rye.
Okay, so that one has a less corn mash.
It has, yes, very low corn. So in order to be, let me back up, sorry, for some of you that may not know. Bourbon has to be 51% corn in order to be considered a bourbon. It has to be made in America, and it has to come off the still at a certain proof. It has to go in the barrel no higher than 125 proof. But basically what you need to know is 51% corn and in charred new oak casks is what makes a bourbon a bourbon. So all of these, except for the rye, including this one, would be considered bourbons. These would be considered ryes. However, in today's American whiskey climate, when people say I love bourbon, they also mean they like rye sometimes. They're using them fairly interchangeably. They're not the same thing, but just because a customer says, oh, I like the green bourbon, it's a rye, you can educate them politely, but they're also in today's climate, there's a lot of what we like to call whiskey douches that like to tell you what you should like, tell you what you're going to like or not like, and project their opinion on you. So we always want to try to not do that as salespeople for the product, because that will turn people away or turn them off a brand. So we try to be good ambassadors with it. But yes, these would all be considered bourbons. This is their wheated bourbon. And so in order to be a wheated bourbon, you typically, again, backing up to bourbon, you've got 51% corn. Then you have usually a malted barley, and then there's a flavoring grain in between. So almost every bourbon has a little bit of rye in it. And if it doesn't have rye, it typically has wheat. Wheat is a sweeter grain than even corn. And so sweet wheats, they call them, sweet wheated bourbons, are kind of their own subcategory, but they still qualify as bourbons because they're that 51% corn and charred new oak casks. So again, everything here is the OG Thompson Willet mash except for these two. This is 100% their wheated bourbon, which is 65% corn, 20% wheat, 15% malted barley? Question? Yeah, 65, 20, 15. And then there's only one that has their high corn mash bill, meaning a higher corn content than the OG Thompson Willet, and that is the Kentucky Vintage. So this would be along the lines, what I compare it to is kind of like a Buffalo Trace, where it's heavier corn, it's around the same age, around 5 to 7 years old, blended, and it's actually the exact same proof, I think, 90. So very similar to that Buffalo Trace stuff, just distilled at a different distillery, crazy different flavor, but similar makeup and build. So the high corn mash is 79% corn, 7% malted barley, or 7% rye, sorry, and 14% malted barley. So what's unique to Willet, all of their mash bills is almost every single one has a higher malted barley content than a rye, and you don't see that at a lot of distilleries.
What does that do for like taste?
So the malting process, floor malting is where you heat a grain until you germinate a grain until it's reached its max sugar content, and then you stop it. So it creates a lot of the mouthfeel, somewhat of a sweet flavor, but usually a more grain-forward flavor. So if you've ever had American single malt or Scotch or Irish single malt, that flavor is a little bit of what's in every bourbon. But it's the backbone that the mash bill builds off of. So you've got your corn or rye, if it's rye, the majority grain is going to be the majority of that flavor. Then you have a flavoring grain that's going to accent or balance the flavor, and then you've got your backbone, your malted barley, that's going to do a lot of your mouthfeel and a lot of the other stuff.
It brings the enzymes to the party.
Yep.
Okay, sweet.
So from there you've got Johnny Drum. Johnny Drum was the next release in the 60s after Old Bardstown. And it is the high rye bourbon, which is 52% corn, 38% rye, 10% malted barley. So that's the last of their bourbon mash bills. So now we've talked about all 4 bourbon mash bills. But it is the OG Thompson Willet mash, that's 72, 13, 15, blended with some of the high rye. That is also the same for Noah's Mill. That is also the same for Pure Kentucky. Rowan's Creek, like Old Bardstown, are the OG Thompson Willet mashes.
When you say Thompson Willet, was that like the
Thompson Willet's the founder and starter of Willet in 1936.
Got it. And is that family is still...
That family's still owned. Yep. So today, through the years, 1980, they stopped distillation. They closed down, actually. Went defunct, you could say. They started producing ethanol in the 70s because there was a fuel shortage. Kind of like everybody stopped distilling to produce hand sanitizer during COVID. For whatever reason, they didn't make it past 1980. I don't know if it was a family thing, if it had to do with the ethanol, if whatever the reason, they closed their doors. But then Martha Willet, one of the Thompson Willet's, I'm not sure exactly, great-granddaughter, in 1984 married Evan Colsbein. Evan Colsbein and Martha Willet are now the current owners of Willet Distillery. So he married into the Willet family. He was a distiller and a salesman in Norway and in France. He's a Norwegian immigrant. And so he married Martha and he wanted to start the stills up again and operating. So they started what's called KBD, Kentucky Bourbon Distillers. And they started sourcing originally in the 80s. So they were buying barrels from other distilleries as an NDP, a non-distilling producer. And they were buying people's cast-off barrels, essentially. Pre-fire Heaven Hill, Stitzel Weller, which is what's the basis of Pappy and Weller used to be, Bernheim, all these old distilleries that people are paying tens of thousands of dollars a bottle now for, was what they were sourcing for cheap and selling under these lines, the family estate line. So that built a lot of their reputation as an NDP originally. And then about, let me check the timeline so I don't give you a bad year, but I want to say it was 2008, they started distilling their own stuff again, and that's when the pot still was released. It was not their own distillate starting off, and you will hear lots of mixed reviews on the pot still. I find a lot of that comes from people that tried it way back in the day, before it was their own distillate. Ever since it's become their own weeded distillate, there's a lot of people that will talk a lot about it, and I'll trick them. I'll give them a pour of it and not tell them what it is, and they end up usually liking it. So it's nothing to write home about. It's not the greatest bourbon ever made. It's a $50 to $60 bottle of weeded bourbon at 93 proof. So it's yeah.
Oh, just
94 proof. So.
with the pot still, do they use like a
They use an Olympic pot still.
What kind of pot do they use?
This.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is what's sticking out of the roof in their main building, or their main distilling house. And it's the only one made on a pot still.
Is that it right there? That should be it right there, right?
I don't think so.
I have a picture of it.
Theirs is quite a bit bigger than that. And
Is
that doesn't look like the building.
Is it it's copper.
It's copper pot still, yep.
Cool.
But yeah, it looks very similar to that. So that's what almost all your single malts and scotches are made from, or made in as well. You've got pot stills and you've got column stills. Pot stills are single runs.
Sweet.
So they run one time and then they're done. You have to remash, redo everything and start another distillation. Column distills are continuous run. So they are just continuously running as you're putting more mash and more water and more everything in. And then there's plates, so you can get multiple distillations. Each plate counts as a distillation in a column still. So the more time something's distilled, typically the cleaner it will be, but the less flavor it will have. So it's finding that middle ground. They don't want to distill any more than 2 usually for bourbon or rye. That third time is part of what that and the proof change. Your cut points off the still are what make you a vodka or a gin, is that multiple runs, because each time you're distilling to be neutral. So neutral grain spirit is what vodka and gin both are made from. And so they're technically odorless and flavorless. They're not exactly, but they are distilled to be just neutral grain. So they do not want that for bourbon and rye. You want to taste, if you drink this off the still, the white dog they call it, or the white lightning, the moonshine off the still, it's heavily flavorful. Lots of popcorn, like kind of buttery, but I mean, some of it tastes like sweet corn. Where all of this flavor and color comes from, for the most part, about 75% of the flavor comes from the wood. So all bourbon can't have additives. American rye can't have additives. And it gets 100% of its color from the wood that it's aged in and 75% of the flavor. So people tend to focus on the mash bill or the age statement. They should be focusing more on where did the wood come from? Whose barrels were those? Were they Kelvin? Were they ISC? All these different cooperages that are getting wood from different forests. That actually matters more, and where it was in the rick house can matter more than what the mash bill is directly. Wild Turkey is a good example of that. Wild Turkey has one mash bill for their bourbon and one for their rye. And if you've ever drank a lot of different Wild Turkeys, they all taste wildly different. So the mash bill matters to an extent, but it and the yeast strain are the starting point of it. As long as it's not screwed up, there's a lot of things that play a bigger role in aging and distillation, or aging and flavor. So Rowan's Creek and Noah's Mill are two that we haven't talked about yet. Rowan's Creek runs through Willet's property, and Noah's Mill sits on the creek. Rowan's Creek is back to their OG Thompson Willet mash bill in the old Bardstown. So that's that 72, 13, 15. That is the base of everything. It is only that. The difference between these two is going to be proof by 1%, but then also the age. So they don't age state any of these, but doesn't mean that they're using super young stuff in any of them. Almost everything up here, actually everything up here, is a 4 to 8 year old blend, and that's getting steadily older as they get older. Their oldest distillate right now that they've released is 12 years old as of this year. So there may be some 9 or 10 year old in pure Kentucky. There may be some 8, 9 year old in Noah's Mill, which is typically a little older age version of Johnny Drum. But Rowan's Creek is about 5 to 8 year old blend, and they're doing that because they want to blend to a flavor. They want this lineup is supposed to taste the same every time you try it. Where they start to differ is their family estate line, which is mostly single barrels, and this small batch rye. They don't care if it's the same flavor every time. They just want a batch that they like or something different. Or a single barrel, which is going to be different every time. So just like we talked about where you're aging it, where the wood came from, can matter so much. Single barrels that sit next to each other for the exact same amount of years can taste incredibly different due to some small factor. Maybe some bacteria got in there that wasn't supposed to. Maybe the wood was on a hill where this tree that got cut down for this barrel was below the hill. All of that can just make the terroir, where terroir would enter into the whiskey world would be the wood and the aging. So terroir is the environment and the soil and how it affects what's grown. It's typically used for wine, not aged spirits. But when you pay attention to how much of a factor the wood plays into aging, I would argue that terroir is what's affecting the aging of those products. Noah's Mill is a high rye mash blended with the OG Thompson Willet mash again. It is their highest proof of their core lineup at 114. And with that rye typically lends to a little bit more baking spice notes on people's palates. Sometimes it's baking spice, sometimes it goes mint. Can be. I mean, the baking spice is as broad as the category is. Could be any kind of pepper, it could be nutmeg, it could be anise, it could be clove, it could be fennel. I mean, there's so many different baking spices, and all of that's fairly subjective to the consumer. So the only flavors that really exist when you boil it down on bourbons and ryes is oak, water. There's some vanillin. Vanillin is a natural extract that's in wood. And then there's wood sugars. So outside of those flavors, everything else that the human palate differentiates is nostalgic reminder of something you had in the past. And that's why when you come up with tasting notes, they're probably going to be different than the person next to you although there may be some overlap. As long as when you're drinking it, you're actually tasting that, it's a real note. I mean, so, but rye typically lends to, especially for people just getting into whiskey, they think of it as spicy, a little less approachable typically than like a wheated bourbon. But then the longer you drink whiskey, it's harder to go back to the wheated bourbons because they're sweet, but they're not as complex as what the rye would deliver. So high rye bourbons and ryes tend to be not early in your whiskey journey, but usually later in your whiskey journey, it's what you want to seek out. And that's a generalization. Again, everybody's different. But I can't tell you the amount, I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and I can't tell you the amount of times people have said, I hate rye, and talking about close friends, and now all they want to drink is rye. So it is an evolution, and it does tend to come if you're pushing your palate and trying to drink different stuff. If you're only drinking Maker's 46 every day your entire life, you're never going to like rye because you're never pushing your palate. So everybody's got a different objective when they drink this stuff. Some people want to just get drunk, and that's what the cheap stuff's for. Some people want to try different flavors, different notes, and enjoy a couple of them. And if you get drunk, it's just a byproduct, a fun byproduct. But the goal is different for every consumer, and it's important to kind of sense out what your customer's after. You know, you can usually tell the guy or gal that sits down and they just want to get plowed. And you can usually tell the one that wants to learn more about it, wants to push their palate a little bit, and they enjoy something different. So Willet offers a lot of different. The family estate line here is kind of their crown jewel. They have a core skew rye that's a blend of their two rye mash bills. They have a low rye and a high rye. If anybody wants those, let me know, and I can look them up and shout them out. But every small batch, 4-year-old rye of theirs is a blend of those two mash bills. Usually heavier on the high rye, which I think is 1174.6, whatever the math is there. Then they've got their single barrel line, which are the other family estates, and if you look, these look pretty similar. So the only way, unfortunately, to tell the difference really is to look at the small batch, the single barrel at the top of the label, and then the age statement and the proofs. So the single barrel line, they have rye, which is their green tops, or what a lot of consumers call them, and they have their bourbon, which is their purple tops, which a lot of people call them. So those are two of the most sought after products in the whiskey nerd world. Your Van Winkle and your Parkers from Heaven Hill and your Master's Keeps from Wild Turkey, Willet Family Estate, or WFE as a lot of people call them, would fit into the purple and green tops, would fit into that mold of what the consumers are looking for that's rarer and harder to get. Everything they do outside of these ryes that looks like that is a single barrel, meaning somebody had to go there and pick it. It was one singular barrel, it was a pick, or it was a distillery pick, but it was still a single barrel release. Yep.
So what's the difference between small batch and single barrel?
Good question, sorry. Single barrel is a singular barrel. It was distilled, they filled it, they put it up. When they bring it out, it's one barrel, that's it. So 53 gallons, they don't fill them all the way, but 53 gallons went in. Whatever comes out, sometimes it's 40 gallons out after time. You have the angel's share, which is evaporation. You have the devil's cut, that's leakage or what gets trapped in the oak. But your yield changes depending. So if you look at these single barrels, this one, a typical, so if they were to fill 53-gallon barrel and pull everything out, you'd be looking at about 284 750 milliliter bottles. This one yielded 148 because of leakage, because of evaporation, because of maybe they only filled it halfway. Whatever the reason, that only yielded 148. And it was 130 proof when it came out. So all of these single barrels, they leave at cask strength, they call it, or barrel proof. And that means whatever the proof is when they dump that barrel, that's what you get. There's no water added after distillation or after aging to proof it down, which is what they do to get the proofs on these others. So that's how you control a little bit of the flavor, but also the proof is distilled water or Kentucky limestone water. Don't let them fool you. They all brag about that. It's actually all reverse osmosis now at every distillery in Kentucky almost. So they're all using the same water. But 148 bottles on that single barrel. This one, and they're both 11 years old. This one was 132 proof, so it came out two proof higher, and there was 123 bottles in that barrel, so it lost even more. So the more you learn about the oak and all of that, the more you start to kind of understand what, if it's got that lower yield, something happened that was unique, and maybe the season, maybe just the seasons were different, and so there was more expansion and contraction, which led to more loss. So the way that all of these age in an oak cask is when it gets hot, the wood molecules expand and it sucks in liquid. When it gets cold, it contracts, the molecules contract, and it squeezes the liquid back out. So that constant in and out into the wood is where it's getting that flavor and that color. So Kentucky, or the whole Midwest, including Illinois really, for aging is totally unique and a great spot to be aging because, as you all know, it'll snow on a Wednesday and then it'll be 85 degrees on that Saturday. So that constant temperature fluctuation, it's doing something unique every time to every barrel of whiskey that's not in a climate-controlled warehouse down there, which none of theirs are. So I think that's all the Willet stuff with the exception of the Willet 8-year wheated. This is a yearly release that they come out with now. It is a small batch, sorry. So single barrel we covered. Small batch is a made-up term with no legal definition that signifies it's more than one barrel of whiskey pretty much. So you've got some distilleries, small family-owned distilleries typically, where the end product matters more than a quarterly increase, like your big companies that are publicly traded. And so they will, I just completely lost my train of thought, I apologize, small batch. So they will do maybe 10 to 15 barrels in a small batch, which is an actual, small batch, where the big guys, since there's no legal definition of it, may do 20,000 barrels in a small batch. And so typically when they're doing that, they're putting in barrels that they didn't like or that turned, and so they can cover up that flavor with other barrels that are better. But each one of those bad barrels is going to degrade the quality of the small batch a little bit. And so what you have now is a lot of consumers think small batch is inferior to single barrels. And the reality of it is small batch is always going to be, the floor is going to be at least here, but the ceiling may never be above here. It's always going to be a little more consistent. And that's another reason you small batch is consistency. It's easier to control the flavor if you're bringing multiple barrels together. Where a single barrel could be this bad, or it could be that great. I mean, the spectrum is way wider because each one just matters on where it was aged and how it was aged. Micro-batching is a term that's, again, made up and doesn't have a real definition, but a lot of distillers have adopted to try to fight the bigger guys on their large, small batches, and it kind of signifies less than 10 barrels in a blend would be a micro-batch, if you ever hear anybody talk about that. Now again, nobody's regulating or making sure that's the case, but in today's day and age with social media and people's access to stuff, I don't think most of your distilleries are going to run the risk of, a whistleblower or that information leaking out and the damage it would do to their reputation. So these are all fairly smaller batches. I bet there's I don't know for sure, I hate to even say it, but I would guess there's 25 to 30 barrels would be the biggest batch, but not for sure on that. I can ask him when I'm down there next month. Actually, this month now. So are there any Willet questions or anything that you want hit on Willet that I may not have?
No, unless you guys have questions. I mean, you went through, we have everything up there here and available, so.
Do you have these?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was just struggling to find them as I was, so it's perfect you brought it up.
Yeah, good. Oh, actually, I do have a little bit more on Willet. So Martha and Evan Colsveen, Norwegian immigrant, with French ancestry. So this is actually his family French crest on the front of the Willet family estate. But he came directly from Norway. So his passion is gin and aquavit. So you have other products that are also imported by Willet, owned by Willet, by KBD, and that is Harrowhorn Gin, which is one of my favorite gins. You guys have Harrowhorn?
Yes.
So a Harrowhorn is a jackalope in Norwegian lore. The bunnies with antlers. But it's...
Wait, those aren't real?
I was on a Zoom call with them last Friday, and they think it is, but I think they were joking. But they're always searching for the jackalope. I think it's a joke about when you get drunk and you're out there searching for the Harrowhorn. But it's a really fun gin, and it's a gin that a lot of people, when I do tastings, are like, oh, I hate gin, because they tried their parents' London Dry, you know, Bombay or Tanqueray or whatever, and they taste like pine trees a little bit, because all gin has to have juniper. Harrowhorn is blueberry, lemon, cardamom, angelica root, marjoram root, and so that blueberry and lemon really they're soft, but they round out a lot of that foresty kind of piney note that people don't always love on gin. And it's still there. The juniper's heavy on the nose, but on the palate, the lemon and blueberry balance it out quite a bit. So that is one of my favorite gins, and it happens to be theirs.
So is that a Willet product?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
KBD, well, it's KBD product. So that's where KBD is who owns Willet, also who owns these other brands.
Okay.
But they're all owned by the Willet family.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so Hodvig that you get
Yeah.
is also their product.
Is it really?
Uh-huh. And so it is a dill-based aquavit, or no, caraway, sorry. So all aquavit, which is a Norwegian or Scandinavian product, it's they kind of joke about it being a Scandinavian gin. The difference is it doesn't always have juniper, it always has either caraway or dill, is what it's distilled from. But theirs is caraway seed that it's distilled from, and then it's got 26 other botanicals like a gin would, or can, and then it's aged in Oloroso sherry casks for 3 years. But with Evan coming directly from Norway, it was important to him. Those are his favorite products in the book, are the Harrowhorn gin and the aquavit. Those are his babies. Where his son Drew, who's the president, well, actually he's the master distiller, his sister Britt is the president, both Colsveens. Drew's focus and is credited with really pushing their own distillate towards these. He's a bourbon nerd. Britt's kind of the president and the operator or the business side of a lot of it. But yeah, now Evan and Martha's kids have taken over the helm and are kind of leading the push. Nowadays, Evan's kind of like Jimmy Russell, where he just hangs out at the distillery and talks to people, and his health's been in and out. His wife, Martha Willet, actually just passed away last month. But I've been down there 20 times and maybe 30, and they do everything because they think it's going to be a good product.
So who is Drew?
Drew is Evan's son, Evan and Martha's son.
Okay.
And he is right now the master distiller and
Got it.
the de facto runner of the distillery. and his sister Britt does a lot of the bookkeeping and the financials, is my understanding. But Drew is the face of Willet right now.
Okay.
Drew Kolstein. But yeah, so then they also have, they have the Norwegian products, the aquavit and the gin, but with his French ancestry, he wanted to do some brandies too. So they have 2 cognacs. They have Bardsith VSOP and Bardsith XO from the cognac region of France. And then they have a non-regionally specific French brandy called Perdon that's great for cocktailing if you ever do any brandy cocktails. It's a blend of Armagnacs and cognacs and non-regionally specific French brandies, so they can't use the AOC term of cognac, which has to come from the cognac region of France. They can't use the term Armagnac, which comes from the Armagnac region of France. France is very driven on their regionality and their protected areas. Champagne, has to come from the Champagne region of France.
What's that product called?
What?
The one that you just said, Armagnac and,
Armagnac and cognac,
yeah, what's it called? The product, what is it?
brandy,
No,
French brandy.
the one that you're talking about, like.
The
from-
specific bottle.
Yeah.
Oh, Perdon, sorry.
What is it?
Perdon, P-E-R-E, space D-O-M.
Got it. Thanks.
Sorry, I was lost. I was gonna say AOC next, so I probably never would have gotten there.
Is it good?
It's excellent.
Is it?
And it's like 19 bucks a bottle at cost.
Really?
That's why it's so great for cocktail. Now, it's a little thinner and a little brighter than like an aged Armagnac or cognac would be. But it's great for sidecars. It's great for Vauquerets. Their cognacs are quite a bit cheaper. This is a whole nother class, but cognac is a very abused category. About 95% of cognac leaves France. They don't drink much cognac in France anymore. And that's your major producers, the names that everybody knows. We won't name them, but everybody knows them.
And just for these guys too, because they're gonna get into wine pretty hardcore, but in France, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, their hardcore rating system, like everything is about their rating of like their brandy or their wine. So when you hear like VSOP, that's a rating that is geared for that specific.
It's a flavor spectrum. So everything like XO usually has a minimum age it has to be, but it's less about the age statement than it is the flavor. This is supposed to taste like an XO brandy. This is supposed to taste like a VSOP brandy. This is supposed to taste like a VS brandy or cognac.
What's the highest rating coming out of France when it comes to wine and brandy?
I mean,
Grand Cru.
Grand Cru would be a region. Again, the Grand Cru region it's about regionality, and the quality that they produce out of that region is usually what everybody's looking for. So there's a Grand Cru region of Champagne. There's a Grand Cru region of cognac. But more importantly, the cognac Armagnac thing is cognac has to be 98% of one grape varietal, where Armagnac can be 4 different varietals and no specific percentage. So there's a lot more variance on Armagnac, but there's also a lot more variance on Armagnac, in a good way. Cognac has been shipped out to America and the UK. We drink most of the cognac in the world. And so when you're producing that much, you're cutting corners. I mean, things aren't the ages that they're supposed to be, and they're adding more blasé, which is a sweetener that they can add legally to cognac and Armagnac. So anyway, like I said, it's a whole different class, but they've got a couple really well-made family-owned cognacs that are much cheaper. All of that was to say that the family-owned cognacs typically are better and cheaper than the names that you've heard. So you're paying for the name when you pay for Hennessy or Douce. I think they're $45 now for the VSOP of Hennessy. You buy the XO Douce and it's like $230 retail. So for reference, The Bard Sith XO, I want to say, is $54 your cost of bottle. And all of that was important to Evan, the dad, with his French and Norwegian ancestry. So, now that will conclude our Willet, unless anybody has any questions. I wanted to.
Yeah, anybody have any questions? That's a very solid run through, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Hopefully we didn't take too much.
And they specifically requested the Willet training because they're very interested in it, so.
Last thing I'll say about them is this is my favorite distillery in the world. I literally joined the company in large part because of how much I love Willet. So I had a bourbon bar and restaurant before and was a customer of BC Merchants. And we had switched most of our cocktails and rail and everything else as a fine dining restaurant. We didn't have to have what product you were after. We could do it how we wanted to and sell you the cocktail. And so Rowan's Creek was our workhorse, and we were doing a ton with Noah's Mill. And, we had them all as well on the back bar, and so they are my favorite distillery. I have to buy all my own swag, but I've got lots of Willet swag. But yeah, they're doing stuff small and controlled. Rowan's Creek is my personal favorite bourbon on the planet, and I don't mean that it in a blind would be stuff that's way higher proof or anything like that, but I catch myself, I've 1,600 bottles at home, so I never have to drink the same thing ever, and I don't, almost ever, except for Rowan's Creek. Like, I crave it. It and Barrell Seagrass down there are the two that I think about after a few days. It sounds very alcoholic. It's for the flavor, I promise. I'm not at home just pounding bottles on my own, but it has a very sweet, like mojito mint, vanilla, kind of toffee note to it. And so it's super flavorful, but it's also a blank palate almost, like a blank slate. So it makes my favorite old fashioned I've ever had. It's great for whiskey sours at 100 proof. 100 proof is a great cocktailing proof. It's not so high that it can, scare off your consumers that don't drink a lot of cask strength whiskey or spirits. But it's not so low that it's just covered up and doesn't taste like a cocktail anymore, where it's all fruit juice or bitters or syrup. So it's the workhorse in my house, and I've been trying to spread the Rowan's Creek love in Central Illinois for 10 years.
So for a customer that is kind of like your, my fancy whiskey I drink is like, a fancy Jack or something, and they want to go to the next level on that journey, so to speak, what would be a good suggestion for us to be like, well, why don't you start with this?
So Jack's a tough one because none of this tastes like Jack. Jack goes through the Lincoln County process, which is charcoal filtering. So I guess actually from the aspect of charcoal filtering, Johnny Drum is the only one that's charcoal filtered out of this whole line.
Okay.
So Johnny Drum would be a good one to go.
So when we talk to the customer, we should be like, okay, well, what kind of whiskey do you usually drink?
Yeah,
if
always
they're like Jack, then we could be like, oh, why don't you try this?
Yeah.
And if they're like,
So again, like I said, if they're Buffalo Trace fans,
Uh-huh.
this 90 proof is going to be something that they may enjoy.
Cool.
If they're Weller fans, this is their only weeded bourbon, and it's the same proof as Green Label Weller. Rowan's Creek, though, even for people starting off, like it's just approachable. It doesn't drink like it's proof, but it also has tons of flavor. So it's my go-to for people that want to try something different that they may have never had. But you can cater it a little bit more directly, like I said, with the charcoal filtering of Johnny Drum. It would be more like your Tennessee whiskeys. Your Buffalo Trace would be the Kentucky vintage. Weller, and then Noah's Mill is going to be for your high proof, cask strength, high spice, your rye lovers. Will typically gravitate towards Noah's Mill. I would say Noah's Mill probably has the biggest cult following of this lineup, minus the rye, but a lot of that's from the proof. You got your proof heads and your age heads, and they want an age statement and a high proof regardless of what it went into the barrel at or any of that other information.
When you said Buffalo Trace, like
Mhm.
Jack was charcoal, Buffalo Trace was what?
Buffalo Trace was the Kentucky vintage.
Yeah, but what
Oh.
kind of was the distinguishing point? Like you said,
They're both 90 proof, they're both a similar age, around 6 years old,
Uh-huh.
and they're both high corn
okay,
mash bills.
cool.
When does the purple top release normally happen?
There isn't a release. That's why I was saying they're all single barrels.
Uh-huh.
So the way we get them as a state is literally my boss is invited down to the distillery to pick a few barrels. Now he could have kept them and given them all to accounts up in Chicago.
Yeah.
But the way he's done it since before I was an account of his, even 10 years ago, 9 years ago, was whoever supports the brand or the reps that sell the most of the core SKUs, including the hair horn and the other stuff, get the most out of the barrels. So he buys all the barrels, he names them, and then he divvies them out amongst the reps based on their sales. So that's how I also do it. The only fair way to do it is, whoever's cranking the most Willet product gets the most Willet.
But it's never like Q4, it's just
Never.
whenever it happens.
Nope. Typically, in the past, it's been, I think they had gone and picked barrels the last 2 years by now.
Yeah.
I think it was around summer that they went. So, and it's not guaranteed it's going to happen every year. And that's
Yeah.
why I don't, a lot of salesmen are going to be like, oh, we got to do this if you're going to get it.
Yeah.
If it's important to you, that's what you got to do to get it. It's bad business probably to chase it directly and only do that because we don't know when it's coming. But I also don't feel guilty making you support my favorite bourbon ever or my favorite gin
Yeah.
to get, I'm not selling Fireball or something else that's just a kind of a cast off for Jose to get an allocated product. I mean, it's genuinely amazing stuff in my opinion to get, so I always tell people support it because it's awesome and it makes great cocktails and it's affordable.
I just want to try it. So the new ones, just
Well, they're single barrels, so every time new ones come out, they're different every time. And there's no guarantee on what. Sometimes they're like, oh, we got 5 barrels for the state, and Benny's is gonna bogart 2 of them. So,
yeah.
it's an imperfect game, unfortunately, but
Cool.
yeah, that's the will.
Dark art.
Dark Arts. So where Willet's my favorite distillery distilling their own, Dark Arts and Barrel Craft are my favorite, we'll call them NDPs, non-distilling producers, meaning they're sourcing distillate that's already made from other distilleries. That used to be a faux pas, that used to be like a no-no, people used to try to hide that. In fact, there's lawsuits in the past 20 years of whiskey companies claiming to use underground spring water for their product when they don't even distill it themselves, and just blatantly lying for marketing purposes. So it's not as negative anymore. Like in Scotland, the master blender is the star of the show, where the distiller is a little less the hero, because blending is harder than distilling, arguably. And there's lots of arguments to both sides of that, but that's a hot button topic. But when you think about as a blender or a mixologist, you're kind of the chef of spirits, like you're trying to balance and blend flavors. When you're trying to balance and blend flavors from all over the country, like distilleries all over the country, which is more so these guys, it can be difficult because we just talked about how different every single barrel can be. Well, imagine every single barrel from Wyoming, from Vegas, from New York, from Kentucky, from Tennessee, from everywhere you could think of in the country that's making bourbon. You can legally buy barrels if they're willing to sell them to you and blend them. That becomes increasingly difficult to do with how wild the flavors are from all the different stuff. Dark Arts is using primarily what they call NGP, Midwest grain products. And that is the largest producer outside of Kentucky for whiskey in America. They're in southern Indiana. And they are responsible for, if we went to your shelves out there, I bet there's MGP in 35 to 40% of the bottles out there. That's how much they produce. So, and it's not a bad thing. Everybody does something different with MGP. Some of it's distilled and aged in Indiana. Some of it's distilled and then they take it and age it wherever their distillery is. And then you get into the blending aspect of it and it really starts to change. And so we're at a point in the evolution of whiskey fandom where people are starting to look down their nose again at blend or at sourcing because there's so much of it out there. But then when you do blinds a lot with people, a lot of times the MGP stuff wins for a lot of people. So we're all our own worst enemy, and preconceived notions are going to drive a big part of your tasting, whether you want it to or not. The marketing exists for a reason. The color of the bottle, otherwise everything would look exactly the same. It would all be in the same shaped bottle with the same label and just a little differentiation. It's not, because marketing is a real thing. So even the people that think they're above it, where the color doesn't matter, the label, it does. They subconsciously are already driven to that color because they like that color more. They like this bottle, so they want to like that, what's in it. Or they don't like this bottle, so they don't like what's in it. That's a big knock against them, is they either love or hate the bottle. So anyway, MGP mostly, they are starting to source from another distillery in Kentucky called Wilderness Trail, which I used to distribute and is one of my favorites, but we lost when they sold. And that actually brings us to their owner, Macaulay. So Macaulay Minton is their owner and operator and blender. I think he calls himself Chief Alchemist instead of Master Blender. He came from Wilderness Trail when they sold to Campari. So he's not a big corporate guy. He doesn't like the bureaucracy. So he'd been wanting to do this for a while. So when they sold to Campari, he left Wilderness Trail and started Dark Arts. That was 2 years ago. And talk about a meteoric rise. In 20 years plus of being a whiskey fan, I've not seen anything like it.
He's an evil genius.
It's insane. I mean, in 2 years, he's won 20 awards at San Francisco Wine and Spirits. I think 10 of those were double golds, meaning every judge unanimously gave it a gold medal. He was in the running last year for most awarded distillery in the country in his first year of operation. He is the definition of an artist. He's eclectic. He wears ponchos and sparkly globe-looking shoes and tornado warning or the test.
Yes.
He wears orange cowboy hats with peacock feathers in them. He's got a full peacock back piece tattooed on his back, his entire back. He's just a very unique artist, individual, but he's a mad scientist. So he is the chief alchemist, and he is what's driving and making Dark Arts so great, obviously. But they're getting to a point where he's getting pulled in too many directions. They're in, I want to say, 28 states already, and 2 years is insane. I think they did, I can't remember the number, but he did like a record number of case sales in his first year. For any first year NDP or distillery. He's setting the world on fire. He's pulling himself quite a few different directions. And he's pretty stressed out, but I was with him last weekend actually. He's a good friend of mine through Wilderness Trail. We actually adopted his dog, so we have the Dark Arts pup at home. But he's a very interesting character, and you can taste how different and how eclectic his palate is, just like his personality is. So, each one of these is totally different. And I know that sucks when you're just learning or getting into stuff, that all three of these greens are different can be pretty annoying because we want to look at the color and we want to be like, okay, those are all the same. The reds are all different, blacks are all different, the white labels are all different. So I'll tell you what the color of the label means, and that's the only thing you can guarantee about that color. Red is the 36% rye mash bill from MGP. They call it their high rye bourbon mash bill. And it's 60-36-4 is the mash bill on that. And that's every red label you see will be that base of MGP. Now from there, the age statement, you're gonna have to look at the front. So we've got 7, 7.5. There will be some 8. But until they hit 10 years old, everything that's 36% rye will be in the red label. The green label is all 95.5% MGP rye. So 95% rye, 5% malted barley. And then the black label is what they call their barely legal bourbon. They call it that because you have to have 51% corn to be a bourbon. This has 51% corn. And then it's 38% rye and 10% malted rye. Got it?
Where's that hat?
What?
You're getting a hat.
Dad's hat.
You're gonna get,
It's
oh,
not part of this one.
oh, Dad's hat rye. I think it's amazing.
He's obsessed with Dad's hat, right?
I distribute that too.
Next time.
It's a good one.
Okay?
I'll bring you some Dad's hat next time.
That's my dad name?
Yes.
Yep, we'll get you some. Dad's hat's really cool too. They distill everything themselves, family owned, Pennsylvania rye. So, yeah, barely legal bourbon. So any black label is going to be that 51.49, but 10% of that 49 rye is malted rye. So again, that floor malting that we were talking about with barley, they do that with rye too, where they germinate it and stop it at the max sugar potential. So I think it's got a heavily fruity note for as high rye as it has. And then all of the cream or white labels are, as of right now, are wild or Wilderness Trail distillate sourced. And that's Wilderness Trail's black label, which is their, oh boy, 64-24-12, I think was its mash bill. The black label Wilderness Trail. So that was distilled in Danville, Kentucky. Now from there, these all have different finishes too. So when you talk about finishing a whiskey, legally, like we talked about, you can't have anything added to bourbon while it's aging. What you can do is after it's done aging, say it's a 6-year-old bourbon, you dump it, you can dump it into a secondary cask for a shorter period of time, and that's called finishing. So think Cognac and Armagnac again. So Cognac and Armagnac has that super fruity, grape forward, because it's a brandy note. If you're taking a rye or a bourbon and finishing it for 6 months in a cognac cask, it's going to leach, it's going to go in and out of the wood like it would a bourbon, and it's going to pull some of those cognac flavors out with it. Same thing with a Calvados or a port or a sherry or Mizunara, which is Japanese oak that has to be 200 years old before it's cut down. And actually it can't be cut down, it has to be naturally fallen. It's government regulated wood. Yes?
Is the white label sweet mash?
Yeah.
It's the only.
All Wilderness Trail does is sweet mash.
So that's.
It's the only one that is from Kentucky, it's the only one that's sweet mash.
Interesting.
And then the rye, so the core lineup, let me go back to that. This is the core lineup. what's always available from them, unless it's out of stock briefly. But these are what's regularly produced and will not change from them. So you've got your barely legal bourbon. It's always going to be at cask strength, and it's unfinished. That's the core line release of it. It will always be that until Macaulay changes his mind next week. This is the rye, and it will always be Amberana finished rye, which is a Brazilian oak that lends a lot of cinnamon and vanilla to it. The Mizunara will always be 100 proof. It's the only one that's not, well, it's not the only one that's not castrated. It's 100 proof, and it will be Wilderness Trail for the time being. And then the red label is toasted French oak, follow me here, from the Joupil-Fleur forest in France, which is credited with being the oldest forest in France and the oldest trees in France. It's like Mizunara, government regulated, has to be naturally fallen, has to be over 200 years old before they can use those trees. And it's actually a different wood from what's mostly in France. It's a Welsh oak that's tighter grained than a lot of your French florists. And so this was the first thing that we've ever been able to find that was finished or used in American whiskey with the Joupil-Fleur forest. And it and the rye are both always going to be 108 proof. So they do add a little bit of water to get them down to 108. We were talking earlier about small batching and micro batching. That's conversations that the owner of Wilderness Trail, Dr. Pat Heist, Macaulay and I used to have when I would go down there for barrel picks. And Macaulay and I always found it fascinating because after every barrel pick, and I've done this with every barrel pick since that I've been on, you go through maybe 6 samples or something, you pick your favorite, and then Dr. Pat would have us dump all 6 together. Once we picked a favorite, because you can only buy 1 barrel, we'd dump all 6 together. As long as we liked all 6 barrels, that beat the one we picked every time. So there goes the theory of small batch being inferior to single barrels. But with that, there was lots of talk about the big guys doing large batches and hiding stuff in it. Macaulay's only doing micro batching for these. So these are all 3-barrel blends only. So we're talking 600 to 800 bottles in a batch and then on to the next batch. And there will be some difference in batches, a little bit in flavor. This actually just won Whiskey of the Year Ascot Award.
Yeah.
I think Bourbon of the Year. I'll have to look that up specifically. But the Black Label Core Batch 12, I think. You're on batch 4, one of the earlier ones. They're already on batch 14, I think. That's how quickly these batches are moving because they're small. But anyway, you'll have customers that will want, each one of these will fit different palates. You'll have to learn your customer's palate to kind of know what to suggest. But for people that tend to hate rye, this is a very approachable rye because of the Amberana finish to it. It's very cinnamon, vanilla, not like spicy cinnamon, but more like Cinnabon, kind of, you know, confectioner sugar, and they even pull a little bit coconut for me at times. So, like, I make a rye tie with this that is one of my favorites, or place rum with it. Then all of these are different. He's got 4 what they call LTOs or LEs, limited time offerings, that come out a year, so 1 per quarter. That brings us to the blunt blend. So the blunt blend will always, according to him, always be a Q1 release LTO. And the blunt blend is a rye that's finished in different sweeter casks, Madeira and Armagnac on this one. I want to say it was Madeira and Armagnac on the first one too. So 8-year-old rye finished in Armagnac and Madeira casks. But he actually has a patent on this. It's the first whiskey ever designed to pair with cannabis. So,
So Nancy Fraley should have done that
yes.
a long
Well,
time ago.
I think Nancy was part of all of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was helping him out, I think, originally at the.
Learn from her mistake of that cigar blend?
I think so. I want to say she was involved with that, but maybe not. But this is the second batch, so the second LTO. So each year there will be a different batch of blunt blend. The other thing, and this was directly from Macaulay, I was like, everybody's got a cigar batch. Why'd you call yours blunt blend? He's like, I don't smoke cigars, I smoke blunts. So that's directly where the name comes from. But
And it's very clear that he smokes blunt.
it is.
It's a big stoner, but what a mad
It's hard to knock it though. I mean, it's one of those things where when you're as successful as he's been and being, kind of do what you want.
Yeah.
So,
It's probably a performance-enhancing drug.
right,
Yeah.
This was the second LTO of last year, Dark Star. This is my personal favorite dark arts ever made that I've had. It's an 8.5-year-old double oaked rye, so with no amber on it. That's what I mean about all these green labels are not the same, other than they have a green label. What's in them is totally different. So unfortunately, for a selling point of view, you've got to either learn them or read the labels, and that's the only way you're going to know what's in the bottle. I don't think Mac was really thinking about back bar or even consumers in the liquor store being able to understand the difference of all the different labels. Sherry Garcia was his third LTO last year, and it's aged in cherry butts. So it's a 36% rye bourbon, finished with, and actually he does a lot of staves, not actually whole barrels, and that's so he can control the flavor. So a lot of people that are finishing nowadays just leave it for an arbitrary amount of time in a barrel, say 6 months or 8 months, and it can be way too heavy of the finish for what they wanted or any consumer wants. To stop that, he's doing toasted staves for most of these, dropping staves in and then being able to pull them out when he tastes it, and it's ready to go. That's part of what's so genius about his thing, though, is he's tasting most of these barrels and saying, that's good, that's not, that's ready, let's blend these, let's do all that. Like literally a mad scientist, blending and balancing everything out. And then this is the fourth quarter LTO from last year. It's called the Ripple Rye, and it is not just the Amberana, like the core SKU has, but it's also maple syrup barrels. So they'll take barrels that they aged maple syrup in, dump them, and then fill this with it, and it's going to leach some of that maple syrup flavor. They just opened their Dark Arts Whiskey House. Last weekend was the official ribbon cutting and opening. So they are available on the trail to visit. They're in Lexington. Really fun industrial district that's got, it reminds me of like Asheville, North Carolina, or Charlotte, or Nashville before it got big, where it's like live bands playing at dive bars everywhere, and lots of fun food trucks and cool
It's not the
shops.
same location as he was in, right?
No.
Completely different.
No, it's by James Pepper.
Oh, it's
So
in
James
that area.
Pepper
Yeah.
is in one building, and then across the parking lot where RD1's old facility
Yeah.
was is where Macaulay is.
Oh.
He bought RD1's old facility. RD1 moved outside of Lexington to a bigger, but super fun area. Lots of cool bars there. Lots of cool
Duck
restaurants. Duck pin bowling
Yeah.
in the same building as his.
It's a college town, right?
Yeah,
Isn't it UK?
yeah, it's where UK is. I
Yeah,
think.
UK is in,
Yeah.
in Lexington. Yeah.
But super popular, fun area, very hip. So I was down there last weekend, I was down there 2 weekends ago, and worked a service behind the bar on Friday for a little bit, and everybody was super excited. They had just come from James E. Pepper. They were on their way to OBC Kitchen for dinner. They got to stop off and try some of they have a 15-year-old buff turkey, it's called, that's super sought after and going for about $1,500 to $2,000 on secondary. And so they've got those bottles for distillery only right now, open and to try, $50 a pour. And so
Dark Arts has the buff turkey?
he bought 26 barrels of it, I think.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So it won't be coming up here, but
Yeah.
it's another one I'll bring back for you to try sometime.
Perfect.
I got one. But he's setting the world on fire. He's blowing up. I think he just went back to Moonshine U, which is, I believe, University of Kentucky's distillation school. And he just went back. He wants to start distilling Amari and gin.
Really?
So, super excited. I want to...
So where his facility is now, is there a distillery in there?
A small still.
Okay.
I think he'd have to figure out something else for that. But that's the plan down the road, is to distill his own gin and Amari. But he claims I'm going to get some say in the botanicals, and we'll see
Cool.
if he follows through on that. But little brag moment for me, I got to create their cocktail menu for their distillery. And so that's why I was down there 2 weeks ago, was training their bar staff and helping them make sure the bar was set up and all the ingredients were there. And so they opened their ribbon cutting last weekend with 4 of the cocktails, and they're rolling out the other 4 next weekend. And they've been shared a lot by other distillers, and a success. So, well, feather in my cap from them. So, biased, but truly amazing stuff, I think, objectively. I think the awards show that. Macaulay is definitely part of the draw, but the team he's assembled, I don't know if any of you listen to bourbon podcasts or YouTubes, but it's Bourbon Night is one of the more popular ones on YouTube, and Sarah Aldrim, part of the duo of them, is now their master taster. So if you go to a tasting at Dark Arts facility, it's probably Sarah that's going to be leading it. Connie Brown is another one. She came from, I think, Castle and Key and other areas, and she's their brand ambassador. So if we do something up here with Dark Arts, Connie will be coming. I got to meet her. And then Jacob, their bartender, for now, future maybe distiller, actually was the master blender at Journeyman in Michigan.
Really?
So if you've ever seen the Raven Head bottle that came out, that was his blend.
What's his name?
I can't remember his last name, but Jacob.
Jacob?
Not sure. But he's who I was training and working with, and he's incredible. I mean, he's so much more than a bartender like a lot of you guys are. He understands flavor balancing, he understands blending, he understands the distillation, which is rare for a bartender to have. So he's doing an awesome job and doing it all by himself behind the bar right now. But I think there's future plans for maybe some distillation down the road with him. Anybody got any questions on Dark Arts? Anything I missed that you want to hear or see or
No?
talk about?
All good.
Nothing?
It speaks for itself.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Barrell Craft is up next. I credit them with being one of, or making blending popular again in American spirits. Like I said, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, it was frowned upon to be blending. Like, why do you have to blend it? Does it suck? Your single barrel's not good? As opposed to like in Scotland, where blending is the art of it. Blending is what's unique to it. or can be if you're doing it right. They're kind of the ones who have been sourcing since day one, and in a time when nobody was admitting they were sourcing, they were bragging about it, with no plans to distill their own. Joe Beatrice, their owner, Trick Stimson is their, can't remember his title, but he's essentially their master blender. He came from Maker's Mark. He was one of the chief scientists from Maker's Mark for 15 years. And then the third in their crew that helps do all the blending is Nick Stevenson, Nick something. And she was a James Beard award-winning mixologist from Haymarket in Louisville before it closed. So that's their team of 3 that have been blending since the beginning. There was another guy, Will Schrag, that was a blender in the beginning, and I don't think he's there anymore. But they've won tons of awards too. Awards are something you have to be skeptical and careful about, because nowadays everybody's got an award. A lot of them have become participation trophies, basically, where, you know, Cheese and Wine is doing an award for best bourbon, and you can directly tie a lot of them back to advertising dollars. So the ones that I tell people to focus on are the ones that are still doing it double blind, where they don't even know what they're tasting. They don't even know the brands they're tasting, let alone what bottles.
Ascot.
San Francisco and Ascot are the 2 major ones. I think ISC Independent is doing it, and Independent Spirits, and I want to say
Mimics Top 100 is the only one that matters, though.
for a lot of consumers. And the reason that his matters is because he was one of the San Francisco judges originally.
Yeah.
That's where he came from, was a whiskey writer and journalist, but yeah, he's a double-edged sword with me.
Yeah.
I respect him, I like it. Our palates rarely sync up,
Really?
so usually his top 100 there might be 15 of that I agree with being up there, but that's how subjective they are.
Yeah.
People take it as the word of God, like the #1 instantly becomes the highest secondary bottle out there, and
That's crazy.
it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But he and Barrell Craft give tons of awards to these guys, or he and San Francisco, not knowing what's in it. So their core is kind of all over the place as well. They just released the Foundation series. The Foundation series are their 100 proof blends. They were the first things that they ever did that weren't cask strength or barrel proof. That's actually why it's Barrell with 2 L's. He was doing barrel proof in a time when nobody else was, and it was kind of frowned upon to do barrel proof. And so a lot of people, when he was starting off, the way Joe tells it was, you know, you're never going to succeed with that. Why would you do cask strength? That's going to be too harsh. No consumers are going to like it. And he, pretty smug, and wants to do stuff his way, and he was the one funding it, so he said, F you, and it's going to be Barrell with 2 L's, and we're going to do everything barrel proof. What he realized 10, 12 years later down the road was he did need some things that just could be cheaper. Usually the higher proof, the lower yield, the more expensive the bottle has to be. He needed something a little bit cheaper, and he needed some back bar play and some cocktail play, and so he wanted something cheaper. So this is 100 proof. They have one more in the Foundation line that's a double barrel, double oaked, meaning it goes in a secondary cask for, I want to say, another 6 months. The age statement on both of them is 5 years. In bourbon, the youngest thing that goes into the bottle has to be the age statement. So it's not really fair, but this has 8-year-old, 5, 6, 9-year-old, 8-year-old Tennessee, and 5 and 6-year-old Maryland whiskeys in it. So it's actually majority over 5-year-old, but by law it has to be 5-year-old. That also doesn't scare him or his fans. He's like, I don't care. They either like it or they don't. I don't care what the age statement says. And so he's done that with these batches. So there's usually, it used to be there were 4 batches a year or 3 batches a year that would come out.
What's his name?
Joe Beatrice,
Joe Beatrice.
Beatrice.
He's badass, man.
He's a no nonsense, you know, kind of a little Macaulay-ish, like I'm gonna do it my way, F all you. I'm the one backing it, it's either gonna succeed or it's not, and so far they both have succeeded very well. So, but the bourbon batches, they used to come out with three a year or so. I think they're down to like 1 a year now in much larger batches than they used to be. But if anything, they're winning more awards than they were before for the bourbons. So like we ran out of batch 36, and each batch is totally different. We ran out of batch 36, I want to say 6 months ago as a company, and just haven't had any batch bourbon from them other than the foundation for like 6 months. So 37 just hit the state last week. And like I said, each one's different. Batch 35 is age stated at 6 years old, but it's got 10, 11, and 12-year-old in it, if I recall. Nowadays, they put most everything that goes into it. So yeah, so batch 37, they took off the age statement altogether, so they're not age stating it. But what they do put is, it's a blend of bourbons, 10-year-old Kentucky, 8, 11, 12-year-old Indiana bourbon, and 13, 14, 15-year-old Tennessee bourbon or whiskey.
Is it Dickel source?
Yeah, the Tennessee would be.
Yeah. So Dickel, MGP.
And Dickel's in almost every barrel product that exists.
Mhm.
Even people that hate Dickel typically love barrel craft. You don't taste the Dickel notes. Double-edged sword again, if you love Dickel, you're not going to taste the Dickel in it. But it's just a great amalgamation of flavors. He's just balancing and blending. They are balancing and blending flavors very well. So all they want is for people to try them, let them stand on their own. It's either great or it's not.
So they have Kentucky in there too?
Yeah.
And
So
what's the Kentucky source?
they don't tell you directly on that. I can tell you that they've gotten from Heaven Hill, Barton, maybe some BBC nowadays, the Bardstown Bourbon Company. There are a couple single barrels of barrel craft that were Willet, supposedly. I have one. It's Willet.
Really?
But not like in blends like this. Maybe some turkey in there at one point, although none of that's been. It's the kind of thing that if you really want to know, you got to go down rabbit holes on Reddit. That's how I find some of the info, or I'll ask my boss if we can ask Joe what's in it. The answer is always no, because of NDAs. But each batch is totally different of the bourbons. Very popular, very award-winning, all of them. There were 2 years that their bourbon won Best in Show at San Francisco, so best in its class. Or best in class, sorry, not best in show. Meaning for unaged bourbon, it won. Dovetail and Seagrass are 2 more of their core lineup, meaning those will always be made and come out in different batches, as well as Vantage, which we don't have up here. So Dovetail is the first that they released in that lineup, and it is rum, port, and Cabernet Sauvignon barrels that it's aged in. So these are, I think, are where they really showcase their talent. Seagrass is Martinique rum, so Agricole rum, apricot brandy barrels, and Madeira. So flavors that a lot of people that know what those taste like would not normally be like, oh, that sounds terrific. These two, when you taste them, there's kind of a bitter or a more drying tannic finish in each of these 3 that separates the sweetness from the rum and the fruit. So it hits you like a roller coaster. So like on this one, I get nothing but apricot on the front end, then the Madeira like kind of dries it out, adds a little bit of raspberry note, and then rolls into just rum sweetness on the back end. It's a rye that's 120 proof that anti-rye people end up loving, and that nobody thinks drinks like it's 120 proof. So very kind of tropical, summery, works great with cocktails other than the price point. But those are two of their flagships.
Sorry, and then the blending, well, when they barrel it, the blending happens before they barrel it, and then they get all that added.
Well, no, so like they'll pick a 10 and 11-year-old Tennessee whiskey that are finished in Madeira. They'll pick, and then they'll blend that with a 12-year-old Kentucky bourbon that's finished in apricot brandy casks.
So with the dovetail and the other ones, the different barrels that they use are in the finishing process of, okay.
So the same thing. So this will be, a 10-year-old Indiana bourbon finished in Cabernet Sauvignon, blended with an 11-year-old Indiana.
Copy that. I follow
That's
that.
finished
Sorry.
in port pipes. And then so that's my understanding. Now, if it's to balance out the flavor, they may do, oh, this one needs a little apricot hit. Maybe they'll add the finished blended product into an apricot brandy barrel. I'm not for sure on that. They're pretty secretive.
The amount of variables in that is...
That's what I mean.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's completely blowing my mind because you have to mess up 5 million times.
And I've watched, so I've been in there with Joe and Trip and Nick when they're blending, and I've heard them, like, man, this one's missing a little bit of that lighter, sweeter wheat note. Didn't we have a 9-year-old Wyoming bourbon in the back going, like,
So
go grab that sample. And then so it's just balancing.
Database.
Yeah, just random stuff. And he keeps like huge databases of every barrel that's in their blending room.
I would be interested in just the math that goes into all that.
It's crazy.
Like just being able to figure all that out. I think
It's
would be-
incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be able to solve any problem.
And that's what I mean about, right, and that's what I mean about the master blender in Scotland is revered for a reason over the distiller. Such say over, they're both equally important. But like the master blender is the hero, where here in bourbon and rye, the master distiller is always the hero.
I think that's an American culture.
It is
thing.
a little bit, but it's starting to change. I mean, these guys are becoming heroes of the story or of the show. The master blenders are becoming, whoever's doing the blending is the one that's going to be putting out the finished product. So the distiller has to not screw it up, but at the end of the day, once that's done, his job's fairly done unless everything they release is single barrels. Every time they do, same thing with Willet. Blending to a specific flavor every time so that every Rowan's Creek tastes the same, that's tough. Makers, Knob Creek, any of your guys that are doing those big batches, that you need a consistent flavor from every SKU that's on the shelf, that's why people buy those labels, is because it's consistent. So where I think it's beautiful when everything tastes totally different, that's not the average consumer. They're going to want a consistent product. They want, when they buy Maker's 46, they want it to taste like Maker's 46. So they are becoming more revered, it's becoming more respected. Sometimes the master distiller is the master blender, actually a lot of times. But these guys are not villainized like they were 15 years ago for blending and sourcing. Joe was doing, I'm telling you, I remember when this time was going on, and people are like, that's never gonna work, you're gonna fail, barrel proof isn't gonna work, sourcing only isn't gonna work, you gotta at least tell them that you're bottling in Kentucky or something. And he's like, no, I don't care. He's like, no, it's beautiful, we're getting it from all over, we're gonna blend it.
And we're going to fail. And we're
gonna fail sometimes.
Accept all of that.
And they had some early batches, so I've got some barrel bourbon batches going back to like batch 9 and 10, and I think I even had a 4 recently that's polished off now. And they all tasted heavily of Dickel. So they've gotten incredibly good. Dickel's just an overpowering note. Anybody that's had Dickel or Jack Daniels, that Lincoln County process, that honey maple charcoal flavor. It's just almost cloyingly sweet a little bit. It tastes like wood sugar extract directly. That's not everybody's cup of tea. And so to have something that overpowering in these and not be able to taste it is, to me, their biggest feat. I think that is what makes them the most remarkable, is how much of that they're using and how much it doesn't just taste like a Dickel product.
So is 37 have finishes, or what is 37?
No, these will always be unfinished.
Okay, so it's just a mix.
Those
of
are just
different-
blends of bourbons from all over the country.
Okay.
There's tons of SKUs here, or that aren't here. There's the New Year bourbon, so every New Year or every end of summer before New Year would roll around, they do a New Year bourbon release. And it is, I call it their bragging or their show-off bottle. Because where these have finishes, or have whiskeys from 3 states, this one might have 4. Nope, 3 states. The New Year bottle always, almost every year, has like 6 to 9 different states. And again, go back to how different whiskey from Nevada, from California, from New York, from everywhere tastes. I call those their show-off bottles. Like, you're only doing that show-off, Joe. Like, you're going to 9 different states to grab stuff from everywhere, all different ages, and blend it, and they're phenomenal every year. They're so good. They've got lots of single barrels. So like, this is Kentucky whiskey finished in agricole rum casks. So Martinique rum. Probably
I know what I'm drinking tonight. Some Barrel.
I can't get enough Barrel. I've probably got 60 different bottles of Barrel at home. And they're all, other than the small batches, or the batches, they're all totally different. So the Infinite Barrel project was a failed experiment they did that was incredibly cool. So it made me sad, but just nobody understands what an Infinite Barrel is. So the Infinite Barrel is, they are constantly blending different whiskeys together from all over the world. So the first batch of this started at 30 different whiskeys being blended together, and they've come out with, I think before they stopped doing this, maybe 8 batches, maybe 10, and like the 10th batch had 430 different whiskeys blended into it.
People weren't getting it though.
People weren't getting it. No.
Well, I mean, at that point though, it seems kind of like a garbage can, right?
It's outstanding. It's a garbage can if it doesn't work.
It's the bar mat special.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like bringing out a bar mat. That's what you think. Excellent. And so what was happening
But
was,
you have like 0 control over that as well.
well, no, they can control it. So the first batch had 30. They take a little bit of that first batch and they add some new batches to it. So they're still blending it.
Yeah.
They're still saying, no, that barrel won't work. Let's do these. And still blending it. Let's take that Irish single malt. Let's take that Canadian rye. And they're blending all over the world into these. So if anything, I would say it's another bragging bottle of theirs that just got overlooked and went under the radar.
You do an Infinity at your house?
I have
Yeah.
a few Infinities. I've
Yeah.
got a Willet Purple Top Infinity. I've got a different Russell Barrel Pick Infinity.
Yeah. Do you actually document it? Yeah.
I've got them all documented down to
That's
the
awesome.
milliliter. And I have probably my favorite one that's not documented at all was I went on 20 barrel picks at Wilderness Trail while we had them. And every time I'd go down, I was going so much, because it was all in a 2-year span, so I was down there an average once a month, but a lot of months it was 3 times in 1 month. And so I would go down and come back the same day, and I wasn't going to drink a bunch, pick a barrel, and then so I would take little sips of the samples, and I'd dump them all together like Pat showed me, and I bought a Wilderness Trail decanter that looks like a Erlenmeyer flask. It's a giant 1 liter, over 1 liter decanter. And so that it's completely full, and it's from every Wilderness Trail barrel pick I've been on. I save a little bit of each one and put it all together. So it's every single barrel of Wilderness Trail that I sampled to pick 20 plus barrels of.
Why didn't I get some of that?
You're welcome to.
I want to try that.
Yeah, surprisingly one of the best things in my house.
That's
So.
awesome.
But yeah, that's what's so fun about all this, and especially in the mixology part of it, is you get to experiment, you get to have fun. My house looks a little bit like an alchemy lab. They've been there. I've always got something dripping, or some infusion going, or clarification, or fat washing, or something happening in there. But it's fun. It's a unique job to be in, what we're all doing, so do it for the love of the game.
Very interesting.
Any questions on Barrell before we move to the last one real quick?
Well, I have a lot, but I'm not gonna ask it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
What do you have?
This is the math. I just wanna know the math.
Oh, well, I can't answer that anyway.
I wanna see the spreadsheet.
I can't answer that anyway. I can tell you, a lot of people, because of the price point of these guys, when they were coming out especially, nobody was spending $90 on a bottle. It just wasn't happening. When they first started coming out was the end of Pappy sitting on the shelf everywhere because nobody would spend $100 on a bottle. So once people try 4, 5, 6 barrels, they start to realize they don't do anything I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I will buy everything, or I'll take that leap now without trying it because I've tried so many of their things and I know I like it.
That's a fantastic way to sell it, by the way.
Yeah.
Everybody that needs.
And if they're afraid to spend $90 or $100 on a bottle, Dark Arts and Barrel Craft, this is the place to come do it. So before they go to Benny's or Oak and Flame to go buy a bottle, they should come here and they should try it first because you have everything. So that's another way you can sell it is, hey, if you've been on the fence about some of this stuff, or if they tell you they've been on the fence, well, I'd try more of it here then, is what I'd tell them. So, last one today is Resilient. It's pretty cool, I think, because it is the owner of my distributor's company. So he is the one who started Resilient. He's been in the industry for 40 years or so, and has been buying single barrels from MGP and Dickel for a long time. Has a great relationship with them, so he's not just getting some cast-off stuff. He and Dave Schmier from Proof and Wood have been buying for probably 20 years, from 20 plus years, from MGP. So these are both MGP. This is a 5-year-old bourbon, and this is something he came out with a couple years ago. It's the start of his finished 5-year-old MGP bourbon line. So there's 3 in that finish. There's Tawny Port, there's a Madeira, and there's an Oloroso Sherry. They are actually closer. He's not changing the age statement, so there's something in America, the governing body of liquor is the TTB, the Tax Trade Bureau. And you cannot put anything on a label in America, any liquor in America, without it being approved by the Tax Trade Bureau. So in order for him to change this to a 6-year-old, he's got to resubmit with the Tax Trade Bureau, wait through the process, hope it gets approved, blah, blah, blah. So he may do it at 7-year, he may do it at 8-year, but right now he's just leaving it as a 5-year age statement, even though it's probably close to a 6-year-old that's in it.
You said those different finishes, are those all in there? Or
No. This is the Tawny Port.
That's the Tawny, okay.
The orange label is the Madeira, and the pinkish label is the Oloroso Sherry.
Okay. Are those
We just
all
brought in-
out now?
They're all out. We just brought in a couple to try. And
Okay.
so once you all try and these are selling better, we've got the other labels we can bring in for sure too. I can tell you there's tons of MGP rye fanboys and girls out there. And this is just a phenomenal single barrel, cask strength, almost 7-year-old.
95.5?
Yeah, 95.5 MGP, 115 proof. Let's see here, math. 7. So it is 4 months short of being a 7-year-old rye.
So it's a cast strength
Cask strength.
115?
Yep. So are these guys.
When you say like buying from MGP or Wilderness Trail, is that like the wash that they're buying,
The
or
distilled,
is it
not the wash.
Okay,
It's
so
already been distilled.
Okay, it just hasn't been barreled yet.
Sometimes it has, sometimes it hasn't. So that's what I was explaining earlier with MGP is everybody's doing something different with it. You can buy their white dog, where it's fresh off the still, unaged, and age it yourself in Peoria, Illinois, if you want. You can buy their already aged 4-year-old, or 6-year-old, or 8-year-old, or 10-year-old, and just take it and slap your label on it.
If you buy like their 5-year-old and then finish it, do you finish it for 3 years? Then that would be considered a 5-year-old.
So in order to be a Kentucky bourbon,
Uh-huh.
it just has to age there for 2 years.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And you wouldn't want to finish it because that would be way too long in the secondary cask. You'd want to actually age it there. But as long as you buy a 5-year-old and age it for 2 years in Kentucky, it's a Kentucky bourbon.
Okay, cool.
So, but yes, MGP produces a huge spectrum of stuff, and you can buy it and customize it however you want, which is why it's kind of cool. Because again, Macaulay's been open 2 years. If he wouldn't have whiskey for another, realistically, 3 or 4 good whiskey for 3 or 4 years, we wouldn't have even heard of it. How do you stay alive for 6 years till your stuff's ready? The answer is vodka and white rum and cinnamon whiskey and flavored crap.
Yes.
And so there's 2 routes that NDPs go, or 2 routes that a new distillery will go, and that is waiting on their own and producing the other spirits while they wait to generate enough revenue to hopefully sustain them until their whiskey's ready. Or you source, and then if you're going to use your own, you switch to it, and that can be disastrous too. Because MGP is so good that there's a lot of people who source MGP to start their distillery, then they start using their own, and people are like, this sucks, go back to the MGP. And so it's the reason that there's lots of failing distilleries. You know, there's lots of successful ones, there's lots of failing ones. But this is bottled in Kentucky, distilled at MGP in Indiana, and I think he's in 8 to 10 states. But it does have some brand recognition on it with people nationwide. And his original batches of Resilient were 10 and 11-year-old MVP that are going for $500 a bottle now on secondary. The first 10 barrels of Resilient were. So let you guys try it,
Yeah,
a few
cool.
of them if you want.
So if we get like a sophisticated whiskey bourbon customer here at the bar, and they're like, they know the MGP and the wilderness stuff, like what is that called? Like if they're
Sourcing.
Sourcing, okay, cool.
They're
So
sourced.
they're like, you know, if they start saying the keyword sourcing, we
You
know,
will have
A,
customer, A, they know, yeah. And B, you can read whether they're, are they sourcing? Or are they sourcing?
okay.
You know, you can read a little bit into what they're saying and kind of steer them.
Just make it.
You know, maybe they want Willet.
1%.
If this isn't sourced, this is their own distillate. But it's also fun. I always like to push people. You know, I try to give them information and educate them and try to change their mind. So like, I hate people that don't distill their own. I want to hit them with, you know, batch 37 bourbon, or I want to hit them with a barely legal black label, or I want to hit them with something. After talking to them a little bit, once I figure out their palate, I want to steer them towards something that is sourced that they may end up loving.
Yeah, so sourcing is like barrels and sourcing.
All of this is sourced except for Willet.
Except for Willet doesn't.
NGP, all over the world, or all over the country, actually all over the world.
Yeah.
They've got some Irish, some Canadian rye, some
Good dark art sources.
dark
too,
horses,
and
MGP, and Willet.
cool.
Everybody's bringing their own unique trait to
Yeah.
each of these brands.
Awesome.
And if you tried this MGP rye next to this MGP rye next to that MGP rye, you would probably not even guess that they were from the same distillery because of what everybody's doing.
Everyone's doing
Yeah.
something differently. Cool.
Yep. Which one did you try?
The 37.
And also the.
Can I try the 37?
You try whatever.
I have a bottle coming next week, but I haven't tried it. Try the Roman Creek. Everybody should try the Roman Creek.
What do you think, guys?
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for making it
Yeah, I like